Oh, hey, I just want to quickly apologize. Episode 90 of the Apple podcast was supposed to come out on Friday, the 23rd, late at night, but I had a sort of a glitch, so it's coming out today on Sunday, September 25th. My apologies. We'll try to stay right on schedule next week. So thanks for listening.
Welcome to the Mac's Future Weekly Podcast. All Apple talk and no chit chat.
Okay, welcome to the Apple Podcast, episode 90. We're up to episode 90. It's September 24th, Saturday, and I apologize. I usually do this on Fridays, and I just didn't have time to do it on September 23rd. So remember, this is a chit-chat-free podcast all about Apple news, stuff like that. So let's get to it. Okay, so the big news this week is I finally got back my upgrade of my 2010 iMac, the 27-inch model. And as if you might have remembered from the prior podcast, I had sent it to a company called Otherworld Computing, also known as macsales.com. And they're a company that does upgrades of Mac products, and I did that. So the reason I sent it off was, I just wanted to make my iMac, my 27-inch quad-core iMac faster. And I was inspired by the 11-inch MacBook Air that I got, which has an SSD drive in it. And I've been reading all over the web how SSD drives really speed up your Mac. Now, I have a very top-end 2010 iMac. It's the Quad-Core i7 2.9, I guess 3 gigahertz. So, and it can go to 8 cores. So it's a really powerful iMac. In fact, its Geekbench score, which is a service that analyzes the power of your processor and your computer, and tracks Macs. There's an app called the Geekbench app, and I got a score of 10,000, which is really, really powerful, But here's the thing. To show you how powerful it is, my MacBook Air 2011 has maybe a Geekbench score of, I don't know, like 4,000 or 5,000. But here's the thing. Even though my 11-inch MacBook Air has a lower, power than my 27-inch 2010 iMac, my MacBook Air feels much, much zippier for launching apps, just for using it. And why is that? You see, it's because of the drive that the operating system is on. It's an SSD drive, a solid-state drive, while the iMac was using a traditional hard drive. It was 1 terabyte. Now, why did it make a difference? Because for everyday use, your computer, when you're launching apps, when you're launching websites, it reads and writes to the drive that the operating system is on. And the computer's brain, the processor, has to access data that's on the drive. It doesn't keep all the data up in the RAM. It has it on the drive itself. And the thing is, the hard drives, they read and write data at a much slower rate than SSD drives. And so that was the main reason that I wanted to do the upgrade, because when I got the 2010 iMac, it was refurbished by Apple, which is a good deal. But because it was refurbished, I couldn't customize it. So I had to buy it as is. And so it came with a 1 terabyte hard drive. Now, at the time, Apple was offering to sell the iMac with an SSD drive, and you could configure it like you can a 2011 iMac by selecting a 256 gigabyte SSD drive as a second drive to the main hard drive, which would be either a 1 terabyte hard drive or a 2 terabyte hard drive. But because I bought it refurbished, I didn't have that option. So I thought, you know what, I'll get it. It's definitely was going to be last year a huge boost in speed, compared to compared to what I had, before, which was a 2006 iMac. And it's been very fast, but once I got the MacBook Air, it just seems slow. And that's because for everyday things like using Aperture or iPhoto or the web browser, it just wasn't as zippy. And my MacBook Air, because it had an SSD drive, was very zippy. So that's the main reason I did the upgrade. And so I did it through OWC. So let me give you just a little tip on my experience with OWC. So if you're looking at the video version of this, I'm on their website at macsales.com, and just click on the right side, Upgrade SSD Drive, 2010 and 2011 Apple iMac. Now, if you look to the screen, you see on the left, you have the turnkey upgrade program for the 2010 Apple iMac 27-inch. And last year, it was only limited to the 27-inch iMac. But now, for the 2011 iMac, they can upgrade both the 27-inch iMac as well as the 21.5-inch iMac. But let's go to the upgrade options for the 27-inch iMac 2010. So you click on it. It's a very well-organized website. And you get options. One option is to just add an eSATA port for $169. Now, what's an eSATA port? eSATA port's a connection like FireWire or USB 2.0, and some computers have them. But the Apple doesn't put eSATA connections externally on their computers. And eSATA can be very, very fast. I think it can go up to 500 megabytes per second read-write. Now, like FireWire 800, I don't know, it gets you maybe up to 100 megabytes per second. So I was thinking, if I'm going to do this upgrade, why don't I get the eSATA external connection? And why was I going to do that? Well, my 2010 iMac only has like a FireWire 800 and USB 2.0 connections, which are not really super fast. And it doesn't have the Thunderbolt port, which the 2011 iMacs do, which is going to be able to handle speeds up to 10 gigabytes per second. So I thought it really wasn't going to cost that much more to get this external port, because I could go to the combo, add eSATA external plus internal SSD. So that's the one I chose. So basically, I chose to keep my original 1 terabyte hard drive, add an external eSATA port, because I already have like a hard drive, a Seagate hard drive that has an adapter to make it an eSATA connection. So I figured there's at least one external hard drive that I have that can use the eSATA port. And they put the port just in the very bottom underneath part of the iMac, so you don't really see it. And the other thing I did was I decided not to replace my standard 3.5-inch hard drive, but I did decide to add in a solid-state drive, but it would end up using the smart card reader that is built into the side of your iMac. It would use basically internally on the iMac. There's 3 eSATA connections. There's one to the hard drive. There's an extra one that OWC was going to use to make my external eSATA port. And then the eSATA connection to the smart drive, they were going to take that and connect it to a new SSD drive. Okay, so the other thing I decided to get was what size drive to get. So I decided to get not the smallest one, the 60 gigabyte OWC Memory Extreme Pro SSD drive, but the 115 gigabyte one. It was a little more expensive. It added $60 to my overall cost. If I got the 60 gigabyte one, the total cost was going to be $359 plus shipping, I guess, and tax. But I decided, spend $60 more and get the 115 gigabyte ones. Now, to upgrade from that to 240 gigabytes, the price was pretty steep. It goes up to another $240, which would have made my cost $659. And if you want to go 480 gigabyte SSD drive, it was going to cost $1,089, and that was like big bucks for me. So I decided to go with the 115 gigabyte version. And what they do is they send you an external smart card photo reader that you can hook up by USB to your computer if you want to still read SSD cards. But I hardly ever read SSD cards anymore. I use my iPhone to take pictures, and I just connect that by USB. Now, the other thing that I decided to get was extend my warranty for another 2 years through OWC. Now, OWC charges $169 to do that. So basically, they'll step into the shoes of Apple and repair on top of your 1 year Apple warranty for another 2 years, for a total of 3 years. So I purchased my 2010 iMac in November of 2010. So basically, by buying this warranty coverage, OWC will fix my iMac through November 2013. And they'll cover things that fail within the computer that not only they installed, but that Apple installed. And it's the same price that Apple charges. So that brought the total price, how much did it bring it to? To $419, and then I got ground shipping, which brought it to $458. Now, is that right? I'm not sure. Why did it cost more for me? We'll have to see. Okay, yeah, no, I forgot to check off a box. So, together with ground service pickup label provided by OWC and the warranty, it totally costs $627. And I guess there's no tax because it's out of state. So for that, I'm getting an eSATA external port, 115 gigabyte SSD drive, and a warranty, and the smart card reader. And basically, OWC arranged to pick up my iMac and through UPS, and now I had to pack it up. And so let me tell you what that was like. So you basically order it. Now, I ordered it, like about a week and a half ago. And let's see, the date exactly was... So the date I ordered it, I think, was September 7th. And the way it works is you buy online. So I paid $627. And then they have to call you to arrange doing it. So let's see, I ordered it like on Wednesday, September 7th. And I think they called me like on Friday. It took 2 days. So September 9th, they called me and they basically said I chose the UPS, pickup service. And so they said they'd arrange it and that UPS would come on Monday, September 12th. And sure enough, like I packed up my iMac, I had the original box, and I left it, and it was picked up at my building. So on September 12th, they picked it up, and I tracked it on UPS, and they got it at OWC on September 14th. And they basically said, look, we'll be able to turn it around and get it out. And here's the frustrating thing. I guess they shipped it. I think they shipped it the next day, September 15th. So I thought I had a good shot at getting it on Saturday, 17th. And the thing is, the separate thing that they sent me, which was the smart card reader, came in a separate box. So they gave me two, and now it's shipped not by UPS, but by FedEx. So they sent it by FedEx ground. And so what was really frustrating is I could see the FedEx tracking numbers, and the little package of the smart card reader I got on Saturday the 17th. But I blame this more to FedEx because I didn't get the even though it was like very close to where I live, and it was out for delivery from early morning Saturday. The FedEx box did not arrive with my iMac on Saturday the 17th. It was really annoying. And then I find out that FedEx doesn't deliver, big packages to homes except Tuesday through Saturday. So I didn't get it on the 19th. I ended up getting it on September 20th. So the only frustrating thing with the service was that the turnaround time, then, if you think about it, my computer left on September 12th, and I didn't get it back to the 20th. So it took about 8 days, but a lot of the delay is Federal Express, not OWC. So anyway, once I got it, and you see what they did as part of the other thing is part of sending it to them. I backed up my 1 terabyte hard drive to an external drive, and then I wiped it clean and installed Lion on it, a clean version with the apps that I wanted. It was a way to do housekeeping. So I did white housekeeping, and I installed only the apps that I really wanted to and my settings. And then OWC basically suggested having like an operating system on the hard drive that you have, and they would then transfer it to the SSD. So when I got my iMac, it booted quickly. I was able to boot it to the SSD. All right, so then I ran it through some tests, and so here are the tests. Let me show you the tests. Okay, so what I did is I started running ZoneBench tests. Now ZoneBench is a nice app that basically runs read-write speeds. So if you look here, I called my new internal SSD drive Lion SSD, and just the minimal, operating system in the apps that I have. It was, only taking up a little bit of my hard drive. So I had 100. My whole drive was about 106 gigabytes. So, but here's the thing. Look at the read-write speeds. If you're looking at the video screenshot here that I ran, and I'm getting read-write speeds of somewhere between 223 megabytes per second and 248 megabytes per second. And if you look at the bottom, the offset gigabytes, that was the case even with larger files. So that's pretty quick. So how does that compare with other drives? Now, my standard hard drive is still in there. So my standard hard drive was getting, much slower speed. There was a burst with very small files up to 122 megabytes read, but the write speed on my regular hard drive is only 48. Or about 50. So look at that. It's like about 4 to 5 times slower. Now for the larger size files, I was getting, maybe 80 megabytes per second read and maybe close to 97 or 100 write. But the point is, it wasn't steady. And some of the reads on the regular hard drive go down in the larger file size to 48. But the point is, it's generally 4 to 5 times faster on the read-write. Now, I also tested other devices that are hooked up. Now, here's the deal. I had a Seagate. I was a little disappointed with this because, this is my Seagate drive hooked up through regular FireWire, and it gets about 33 megabytes per second read write. Now the thing is, hold on, I got like the little, let me go back to my here we go. All right, so then let's see, what screenshot is this? Here's my 1.5 terabyte Seagate drive with FireWire 800, and I'd get read speeds of between 61 and 77 megabytes per second. Google Chrome is failing here. And then my regular USB external 3 GB hard drive was getting read and write speeds of between 23 and 33 megabytes. So you can see this internal SSD drive eSATA is just much faster. Now here's the thing, I then hooked up my 750 gigabyte external Seagate by eSATA to the new eSATA port, and the speeds were faster, but not crazy faster than it was with FireWire. Like the short file sizes were between 31 and 50 and 31 and 60 for read write, but on the larger file sizes, it trailed off. I was getting much slower speeds. So I don't know if that's the drive or the eSATA connection. I think it's the drive, because look, let's see, let's go back again to the I think this is it. Now let's go to the same drive. When I was doing just FireWire regular, it's across the board like 33. So I think though where I'll see the faster speeds with the external eSATA is if I put an external SSD drive there. And so part of what I'm thinking is in the future I could get an SSD drive that's the same size as my internal SSD drive and maybe RAID them together and have them work as one hard drive. Anyway, so those are the speeds. So overall, I'm very thrilled with my upgrade by adding the SSD drive in the iMac. And I think Apple should be selling it with the SSD drive, because the real difference in speeds I'm noticing are things like iTunes and Aperture and iPhoto. And here's the interesting thing. Even though I didn't put all my Aperture data or my iPhoto or my iTunes data on the SSD drive, instead I put my iTunes music library on the main hard drive, and the same with the photos. But the applications and the metadata for the applications, the library stuff, is all on the SSD. And for things like iTunes scrolling, it's much, much faster with the SSD, even if the data is not there. And it's the same for everything, like the web browser, the launching the calendar app used to always be slow on my regular hard drive, and now on the SSD on the iMac, it's much faster. So to me, it's worth the upgrade. It really does make it much faster, and I think very soon Apple's going to be just selling iMacs and MacBooks Airs and MacBook Pros with the default being an SSD drive in it. And it totally makes sense. It's revolutionizing the computer industry. Okay, so let's go to some Apple-related news. This week, Apple launched a new store in Shanghai. Now, I think this is is it the third store or the second store? Now, I've been to Shanghai, I guess, last year when they opened up their first store. And this is on the Nanjing famous shopping road. It's called Nanjing East Store. And it's going to be Apple's largest store in China. This is from MacNN.com. And it notes that it can serve up to 40,000 people per day, and has some 300 store workers who were present for the opening. And there were 500 people lined up. Now, you'd get a bigger line in the United States, but still 500 people is decent. And I'm telling you, China's going to be a big market. Although the vast majority of people in China can't afford the Apple products, the point is there is a middle class that is small by Chinese percentage standards, but huge by international standards, and they all like quality, glamorous products. That's what I noticed when I was there. So there are going to be people who save up for their devices in China, and so I think China is going to be a very successful market for Apple. Okay, so we know that there's going to be an event in the fall for Apple, most likely where the new iPhone 5 is announced, and it's going to be Tim Cook, the new CEO's chance to sort of lead these presentations instead of being a second act to Steve Jobs. And the TheAppleBlog.com, as well as the Wall Street Journal at All Things Digital, they all pretty much think this thing is going to happen on Tuesday, October 4th. Though that's not the coming week, but the following week. and it looks like it's going to be on Apple's campus. It's not going to be at the Buena Vista Center or whatever Vista Center in San Francisco. So, you know, it's exciting because I think iOS 5, which has been in beta, is going to finally be released around then, which is going to run well on existing iPad 2s and the iPhone 4, and I guess maybe even the iPhone 3GS. And it's going to be a big event, and I think Apple's going to announce some little surprises regarding iOS 5. Maybe there'll be some things that weren't previously announced that are in it, like Nuance's voice recognition. There's some rumors of that, and it's going to be a big event, and I'm going to try to blog about it right there and then. Now, one thing we may see on that day when Apple releases the new iPhone is there might be two versions of the iPhone. And so what's been discussed sort of repeatedly in the last few months have been rumors that there's going to be two different types. And by two different types, I don't mean like an iPhone that has like a 16 gigabyte storage and 32 gigabyte storage, or it comes in white and black. I mean two different models. And one of the rumors is that Apple's going to reveal a cheap version of the iPhone that looks just like the current iPhone 4 and is going to be called the iPhone S. So maybe it'll have like a better camera or a better processor. And that Apple's also going to release a newly designed iPhone 5 that has maybe a bigger screen and is thinner and is stylized. Now, so basically, if you look here at MacRumors.com, they had a story that said iPhone 4 cases are already appearing. And the article says, while the focus has been on potential iPhone 5 cases, at Chronic Wire posts new images of OtterBox case boxes specifically labeled for the iPhone 4S. He goes on to claim that the OtterBox has produced 3 million cases for the iPhone 4S. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's very viable. Apple, in the past, has competed on the cheaper end of the smartphone market by making its last generation iPhone be the cheap model. So currently the 3GS, you know, you can buy them on AT&T or Verizon. They have like deals to get them as low as $50. Occasionally you see them maybe even lower than that. But maybe Apple's doing something different. Maybe, you know, it doesn't want to make the iPhone 4 in its current state. Maybe it's a little too expensive to manufacture. So maybe they'll make an iPhone 4 that has only, let's say, 8 gigabytes of storage and sells for a very cheap amount. Or maybe they keep the storage sizes but don't upgrade the processor, but then make it cheap without a plan so that you can buy the iPhone 4S without a long-term commitment to a cell phone provider. Personally, I would like to see the iPhone have a model where you don't have to sign up to I guess a phone service where you're tied in for 2 years, but rather you just have a month-to-month data service, or that you can buy phone service on a month-to-month basis and buy separately data like with the iPad on a month-to-month basis. I would love to do that, because what I would do is just buy the data and not the phone service and use voice over IP. That would be truly revolutionary if Apple did that. So we'll have to see. Now, a lot of people, you know, say that, look, and there are more Android smartphones, so Apple's iPhone is second place to the Android devices. But as a single selling phone, the iPhone really sells much more than any single Android device. But there's some other interesting data which makes me think that some Android users will be defecting to the iPhone and not vice versa. And MacRumors published an article that drew on, I guess, a survey done by or a report done by the firm of UBS. And basically the point is that the iPhone users demonstrate stronger loyalty with planned retention rate of 89%. So basically they looked at how likely are users going to purchase another device from the same manufacturer, and Apple's iPhone users have a retention rate of 89%. that means 89% will buy the same device. While HTC, which has Android phones, the loyalty is only 39%, and RIM only 33%, and Samsung only 28%. So, that's kind of very huge, because I do think that Android purchases are more fickle. I think there's a lot of Android purchasers who just could not get the iPhone because they were on Sprint or T-Mobile, and they wanted a smartphone that was like the iPhone. And I'd be curious to see how many Android devices are sold on Sprint and T-Mobile, because a lot of those customers could defect to the iPhone once the iPhone comes to Sprint or T-Mobile, and supposedly it is coming to Sprint this fall. And then there were those who maybe bought Android on AT&T or Verizon because it was cheaper. But they, maybe they're frustrated with it and they want to go with, the Prime device, which is the iPhone. So we'll have to see. But these are interesting stats. Okay, so the other big news this week was that Apple hit new stock price heights. So this is in the post-Steve Jobs, Tim Cook era. Apple on, let's say, Tuesday, September 20th, hit like $420, I'd say close to $22 a share. It closed on Friday, September 23rd, at under $405 a share. But the whole market was crashing on Thursday and Friday. So Apple hit new heights. And it overall, in terms of PE ratio, it still has a pretty low PE ratio of $16 price per earnings. And, it seems to be doing well at a time that the whole economy is not doing well. And in terms of market cap, it still surpasses Exxon. The current market cap for Apple is $374 billion. And let's see, for Exxon, it's, I think it's like several chunks lower. Let's see, it is for Exxon Mobil, which is at $70 per share pretty much. Exxon's, wow, it's almost like $40 billion less in market cap at $336 billion. So financially, Apple seems to be doing well. Now, one of the technologies that is very exciting and interesting in the Apple computers are Thunderbolt, which is the new type of connection that looks like a DisplayPort connection, but uses new technology from Intel and Apple, which allows data to be transferred as fast as 10 gigabytes per second, which is just enormous fast. And up till now, there haven't been a lot of devices that work with the new Thunderbolt ports, but LaCie, which makes desktop drives, according to TheAppleBlog.com, is finally shipping, and Apple is beginning to sell the LaCie Little Big Disk external drive in both 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte capacities. Now, they're pretty expensive. They cost $400 for the 1 terabyte and $500 for the 2 terabyte, but you get much faster speeds. I don't know if they'll get the full 10 gigabyte read write. In fact, it's going to be much slower. It says here that they can achieve transfer rates of 251 megabytes per second. So what's interesting is that's the speed of my 3G SSD drive. So what's nice is with one of these drives, which is a regular hard drive, you get massive storage, but the speed, the read-write speeds that are comparable to the SSD drives that are internal. And it says here you can daisy chain 4 of these drives together, and I guess RAID them and get speeds up to 782 megabytes per second. So, it's an interesting technology. I would love to see, like in a couple of years, what kind of speeds you're going to get with this LaCie, with the Thunderbolt connection, and faster read-write SSD drives. So, if you've got a new iMac or a MacBook Pro and really want to take advantage of these faster LaCie drives, you might want to check it out. It should be very interesting. Now, one concern that I have is that as Apple grows bigger and bigger and more successful, that its quality doesn't go down the drain, because that quality is really a hallmark of Apple's success. But there was an article by Marco Arment on his blog. Now, Marco Arment is the developer of Instapaper, and apparently he's had huge problems with I think it's a refurbished 2011 15-inch MacBook Pro that he got. And basically he says that there's all sorts of heating problems and the fan runs too loud. And this is from his blog. And he wrote before, that there were issues with it. But then he writes on February 20th, it turns out to be worse than he thought. And on the last day of his return period, he returned in exchange for a slower model. And so here's what he says. Not only does the 2011 15-inch MacBook Pro run much hotter than previous generation, but as a result, the fans very frequently kick up to full speed, 6,200 RPM. Now, he got the very top-end MacBook Pro with the, I guess, dedicated GPU in it. And so remember, in one hand, when you get this extra hardware that allows it to run on a separate graphics card, it can make things much harder, and you've got it all compact in. So he basically looks like he wants to get a less powerful MacBook Pro, because then that won't generate as much heat. So it's a little disconcerting. Frankly, I think the better combo is get like a big iMac when you want the real power for processing. Marco Arment made a big deal out of the fact that he sold his Mac Pro to 5x5's Dan Benjamin, and he was really thrilled just to have one computer for all his computing needs. And I always felt that, look, for really full power, a desktop model is better because you get more value for your money, you get a big screen, and Marco Arment decided to go for a compromise and have like a 15-inch MacBook Pro. But I think, the challenge for these compact devices is packing in all this processor power, whether a graphics processor or a regular Intel processor, and the heat. What do you do with the heat and the battery power? So I actually think the best thing to do if you've got a little money is get like an iMac, and then have your second device be either an iPad 2 or a MacBook Air, or a MacBook Air and an iPad 2, which is what I have in my case. So it's a little disconcerting. He says, put simply, it sounds like the 2010 15-inch MacBook Pro has a lot of manufacturing inconsistencies and defects that result in improper cooling, but it also sounds like Apple wedged far too much power draw and heat into an enclosure that's not designed to properly cool or power these demands. And he goes on to say, it's not like Apple to release products like this, but if I can get one working with my tolerances, it's still the perfect computer for me right now, so I'm trying. And then he goes on regarding what solutions he tried. He says he ordered a slower model that's likely to run cooler, but he also added it in the anti-glare display. And so in terms of the GPU, he has the AMD Radeon HD 649OM, and instead of the 6750M AMD Radeon, which was the top of the line one that he got, he says that GPU has far less computational power, so I'm guessing this will result in much lower power consumption and heat. And then for the CPU, he's got the 2000 quad-core i7. He says this is the only CPU available with the 6490M GPU. And he says, well, I don't expect it to be dramatically cooler running than a 2.3. Since it does have lower clock and lower turbo boost speed. So he's trying to see if he can get like a little less power to get less heat. So let's see how that turns out, and I guess Marco will probably write about it some more. Okay, so we all know that, you know, Apple is going to want to make faster and faster processors for the iPad and the iPhone and mobile devices. Well, there's a clue in the Xcode developer tool. Now, Xcode is the program that Apple has on the Mac that allows developers to create programs not only for the Mac but for the iPad and the iPhone. And one website called tgdaily.com said that developers have seen code in the Xcode developer tool for what's known as quad-core ARM CPUs. Now, right now, Apple uses dual-core ARM CPUs. It's called the A5 chip in the iPad and the iPhone. But there is indications that there's code in there for support for a chip, I guess, that a company called Marvell is going to make that's going to be a quad-core. So that could be, you know, that could be way down the road. Already we know that Apple has an ARM-powered CPU dubbed A6, and that's expected to be a dual-core chip built on a 28-nanometer process via 3D stacking technology. So maybe that's going to be the quad-core, maybe the A7, which might be not the next generation iPad, but the one after that. But the point is, look, these iPads and iPhones are going to become faster and faster and faster processors that are really going to start competing with having a desktop processor. Now, we sort of know that the iPad is the future of computing for Apple by the fact that the iPad seems to be everywhere for the Apple, for Apple. I mean, for example, remember a while ago, Apple put iPads as kiosks for almost every device in Apple stores. In other words, instead of having paper brochures, Apple had these embedded iPads put in throughout its stores, you know, for selling different things like the Macintosh, like the iPod Touch, like the iPhone. You'd have like an iPad. Well, word comes now via thenextweb.com, via a report by CNET, that Apple's on the verge of launching a pilot program which will enable its retail employees to borrow an iPad for up to a week, and basically says they want to make the store staff more familiar with its products, the iPad. Now, it's interesting. I'm sure they offer a discount to buy it, but maybe maybe Apple doesn't want to just give them away. That's another way to do it, is to say if an employee's been there long enough, they get a free iPad. I mean, the cheapest one is only $500, but I guess this is a step to make sure everybody has the chance to play with an iPad who works for Apple in a retail store. And it makes sense because you want them to be very familiar with the device. Now, Apple better hurry up and get its social networking, going, because, Apple hasn't done well in social networking, and it seems to be being eclipsed in having a good social network from Google Plus and Facebook. And the latest salvo is Facebook, facing serious competition with Google Plus, has redone Facebook, or it's about to, and has a new feature called Timelines, and that's going to be pretty wild. It's going to have like pretty much your entire activity on Facebook available as a timeline, and you're going to be able to see everything that you've done, and it actually is very deep. Now, I don't know how great it's going to be, but the point is that Apple's competitors, Facebook and Google, are very active in expanding the social web services it provides. Now, Apple's other main competitor is Google, obviously, and Google Plus this week made itself open to everyone. It's no longer in beta, and Google Plus is really cool. It has, among other things, Hangouts. Hangouts are the ability to do sort of video chat with multiple people through the web browser, and now it's even available on the iPhone app for Google Plus. Now, you can't initiate a Hangout from the iPhone app for Google Plus right now, but you can join one and use your video camera in the front and back. So Google Plus is really good. I'm on Google Plus if you want to. Well, you don't need an invite anymore. You just go and join. And it's sort of like Facebook, but it's better. I find it better in terms of I don't know, it just seems better. I don't like Facebook too much. But the point is, Apple doesn't really have a lot. If you think about it, Apple has Game Center on iOS devices and Ping. And Ping is kind of a failure, I would say. Wouldn't you? I mean, what does Ping really do? It's really for music referrals. Now, the only choice we really have is Twitter, because Apple has integrated Twitter completely into its iOS, and I think actually Apple's eventually gonna buy Twitter, because Twitter's private right now, and it would make sense because then Apple would have a real presence in social networking. So I predict there will be, I'm looking at my Twitter timeline right now, I do believe that there will be an acquisition at some point of Twitter by Apple in a private transaction, just to make sense. So how are Apple's other competitors doing? Well, Hewlett-Packard had been the number one is currently the number one PC seller in America, so obviously it's a competitor of Apple, and it can't try to come out with a competitor in the iPad market with the touchpad, and we all know what happened. CEO Apotheker, who has only been CEO for less than a year, axed the iPad a couple of weeks ago and also announced that they were going to get rid of the PC business. Well, now comes word that Hewlett-Packard has axed Leo Apotheker after just 11 months on the job, replacing him with Meg Whitman, who used to be the CEO of eBay. Now, I think this is a huge mistake by Hewlett-Packard. I don't think she knows anything in terms of running a big company like Hewlett-Packard or being a visionary. I mean, she didn't really transform eBay into being a visionary, so it's kind of a stupid move. But the point is, Apple's competitors are in turmoil, and there's no competitor more in turmoil than in Hewlett-Packard. But another competitor of Apple's, that's Amazon, is on the verge of launching a true competitor to the iPad, or a possible competitor. And this comes from thisismynext.com, and basically it's saying that Apple's going to hold a press conference this coming week on September 28th, and a lot of people think that they're going to announce a color Kindle, like 6-7 inches in size, that runs Android and has a touch screen. So the rumors are that they're going to release this Android device around $250 or so, and that it's going to be Android based. And I think that's very viable. Android is free. But this is also going to be a problem for Google, because Amazon's going to bake in its own version of Android and make it sort of proprietary and not really allow Google to get in all the fun on their Android device. And it really, the Kindle tablet at $250 and a diminutive size of 6 or 7 inches is really designed to compete with Barnes & Noble's Nook, which also is running some sort of Android on it and is, that's proprietary. And I don't know if it's really competing with Apple unless it has full functionality. If it does have full functionality, I wouldn't be surprised if Apple found a way to eventually release a 6 or 7 inch tablet at around, let's say, $299. So the competition in the tablet space is going to become really interesting in the coming year, and I think Amazon's what it's going to do is going to be very interesting. Now, we all know that Apple is suing Samsung for ripping off its, what the iPhone and the iPad look like, but things are getting a little ridiculous in terms of Samsung copying the iPad and the iPhone, and apparently, Electronista.com picked up on a story from All Things D, which is the Wall Street Journal, which had a picture of a display at a Samsung store within store in Italy's Centro Sicilia. And basically the wall design for the mini shop appears to feature a number of distinctly Apple app icons, including Safari and 3 instances of iTunes app. So this is kind of obnoxious of Samsung, and I wonder if Apple's going to use this. You can't sort of just copy Apple, and that's what they seem to be doing. Now, I saw another ripoff of Apple. And, Apple has these distinctive plugs, for the iPad and the iPhone, these distinctive plugs. And it looks like Samsung's is the similar style and only in black, but almost the same thing. So shame on you, Samsung. You really should innovate and not just copy the design and feel of Apple products. You should always look out for malware and other bad things on the internet when you're on your Mac. And Cult of Mac had a good warning on September 23rd for anybody who's on a Mac. And the title of it was, "The latest Mac Trojan disguises itself as a PDF to give cyber criminals backdoor access to your machine." And it says a new Mac Trojan called Trojan Dropper OSX Rever.a disguises itself as a PDF and then tries to open a backdoor in your Mac, allowing hackers to gain entry to your system. Once they're in, you probably won't even be aware that your system has been compromised. And it says it spreads through a PDF file, so don't open any that aren't coming from a friend or a family member who trust you. Know the PDF when you open it, because if it's filled with Chinese characters, which apparently make up a foul-mouthed, pan-offensive political screed. So be careful if you're opening any PDF attachments from people you don't know. That's a good service warning from the Cult of Mac website. Okay, so another big thing that happened this week is that Apple delivered upgrades to Final Cut Pro, which is great. And the updates are pretty important. They added stuff that people were complaining of before. For example, you can now import and export XML to support third-party workflows. You can export audio and video stems as a single multi-track QuickTime movie or as a separate file using roles. And you can place projects and events on Xsan to improve collaboration between editors. So these were a lot of the full Pro features that were missing when Final Cut Pro X came out at the early part of the summer, where the pros were really outraged. There's also enabling full screen view in iOS Lion and speed up delivery with GPU accelerated. But here's another key thing. Apple has also now released a free demo of Final Cut Pro X, a 30-day demo that you can download from the website. So if you just want to test it out, you can without buying it. And of course, they are selling, I guess, the old version of Final Cut Pro 7 to people who have legacy systems and want to keep buying some discs. So anyways, look, I think Final Cut Pro X, I like the improvements, but some people didn't, and so Apple's trying to appease them. So Apple in the past has been criticized for, I guess, violating your privacy by tracking like your iPhone, or you're having a cache there. But, it was all not that big a deal. But the point is, Apple does appear to be committed to trying to protect your privacy. And there's a story on TUAW.com, the unofficial Apple weblog, that Apple has joined the Digital Due Process Group, a coalition of privacy organizations like the EFF, which is there to protect your rights online. And it says that this article says that companies are lobbying to reform surveillance laws in the U.S. The group hopes to modernize the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, the ECPA, which was enacted in 1986, long before the Internet became a household name. The article says the law does not address sticky subjects like cell phone location tracking, search history storage, and more. And apparently the one-year-old group includes members like Google, Microsoft, and Twitter. So basically, they're afraid that if the law allows, law enforcement or other entities to really just track every moment of you, that people won't be embracing this new technology. So it says here, Apple recently joined this group and has been awarded a gold star from the EFF for lobbying Congress about user privacy. And it goes on to say this is a change from earlier this year when Cupertino was under fire for storing location information. So look, Apple's trying to do the right thing, it seems. Okay, so that's it for episode 90 of the Apple Podcast. Thanks for listening. And remember, you can help out this Chit Chat free podcast by giving it a positive plug in iTunes or on YouTube or on Blip TV or in the video version of this podcast on iTunes called all things Apple. So thanks for listening, and see you next week.
This has been a Max Future production.